Yeah. Thank for that. Okay.
Okay, let's go. Welcome to All About Music 2020. It's our fourth glorious year and our first in its 100% digital avatar. In 2020, it seems obvious that women should get equal pay, equal opportunities to study and work, access to every vital service, and freedom over their bodies and lives. After all, it's been 127 years since women were first allowed to vote, 57 years since the first woman went into space, and 48 years since a Fortune 500 company had their first woman CEO. In reality, the transition towards a world with gender parity remains a seemingly and grudgingly slow trot. The recently released World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Index report of 2020 says that the world of gender parity could be, and wait for it, still a century away. The same report also placed India as number 112 out of 153 economies in terms of gender equality. So what does it mean for an Indian woman or a woman from any part of the world with dealing with staggering inequalities at work, home, and in society? If we want a progressive and profitable business, we need to address the gender bias and the sexism issues in our industry. Although some of us are doing really great at addressing this, but in the music industry, not just here, but all over the world, there seem to be a low number of women in senior leadership positions. So today we'll have a discussion around that. What does it take for more female leaders to get to the top? And for a change, instead of hiding behind the usual platitudes, let's grab the issue that everyone hides, refuses to discuss, and ask ourselves the hard question that everyone's afraid to ask, and have ourselves an honest, hard-hitting chat so that many people who are watching this, both men and women, have key takeaways that they can actually use in their path and process to progress. I'm very, very proud to welcome my panelists, and I'm going to go through their names and who they are in a quick second. I'm very proud to welcome Hiba Irshad, Director of A&R in JioSaavn, based in New York. Nita Raghuvanshi, co-founder, SVP, Legal and Business Development of NPRX, Global Co-Chair Chapters, Women in Music Global, also New York. Mandar Thakur, my dear old friend of, 25 years, I think, Chief Operating Officer of the Times Music from the Times of India Group. Priyanka Khemani, definitely the most eminent, #1 female lawyer in the media and entertainment business in India. And finally, last but not the least, Vivian Lewitt, Director, Content Partnership, Global Artist Head of Artist Relations of YouTube and Google Play. Everyone, welcome. My name is Devraj Sanyal. I'm the Managing Director and CEO of Universal Music Group for India and South Asia. And I'm very, very, very proud to be moderating all of you in this incredible panel. So welcome. I'd just like to quickly give you a minute each to just tell everyone who's watching who you are, what you do, apart from just the obvious designations. Let me start with you, Vivian, and we'll go backwards.
Okay. Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm Vivian Lewitt. I look after our global artist services within YouTube and Google. And that entails everything from making sure that our products and the features that it provides work well and optimize the platform for artists, and also that we're developing the kind of deep and immersive relationships that we want to have with artists in the industry so that they can access the most up-to-date information and education so that they learn and understand the value of YouTube. I've been at YouTube for about 9.5 years now. It's been an incredible journey. We've accomplished a lot, and there's always more to accomplish. And then for many years prior to that, I was a music attorney in private practice in New York City.
Excellent. Welcome, Vivian. Priyanka?
Hi, everyone. I'm Priyanka. As Devraj mentioned, I run my own law firm in India, based out of Bombay, where I advise a whole bunch of talent across film, music, TV, work with studios, labels, publishers, and across a variety of legal and commercial issues. A lot of our work also involves advising on policy, thought leadership in the entertainment, technology, and media sector. Besides that, I also chair the Women in Music local chapter in India, and along with Neeta and a bunch of us who globally form part of the community. And I am very, very thrilled to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. Welcome, Neeta.
Hi, I'm Neeta Raghavansi. I wear a lot of hats in the music industry, but I've been an entertainment attorney for 25 plus years. I'm a music entrepreneur in that music tech world. I'm the co-founder and senior vice president of business development and legal affairs for NPREX, National Performing Rights Exchange. I'm the president of Music Managers Forum with US, which is the 27-year-old trade association for music managers and self-managed artists in the US. And I am global co-chair of Chapter Expansion for Women in Music, which is the global nonprofit. We're now in our 35th year, the global nonprofit for women in the music industry. So also very thrilled to be here and to have this discussion. Also one of the co-curators of All About Music. So thank you All About Music for having us and holding this very important and crucial topic.
Welcome, Neeta. Hiba?
Thank you, Devraj. I'm Hiba Arshad. I'm Director of A&R at Geo7. I've been with the company for about 4.5 years now and helped start our in-house label, Artist Originals. Beyond just A&R, I manage all things artist at the company, and I'm extremely passionate about supporting female talent and female executives within our organization. I've also had the opportunity to work with several artists across the world and really been at the forefront of creating meaningful cross-cultural collaborations within the music industry. I'm very passionate about supporting women's initiatives as well. I started our annual Women's Day event at Geo7. Unfortunately, this year, due to the pandemic, it has been postponed, but very excited to be a part of this dialogue and to continue the discussion.
Excellent. Welcome, Hiba. And finally, Mandar.
Hi, everyone. Firstly, honored to be here. I just figured if there are 3 lawyers on the panel, I must be here. But having said that, I run Times Music. I've been at Times Music for the last 10 years, and I've got a background in digital music. I was one of the founders of the first digital music service in Asia, which then got acquired by Motorola. And prior to that, I was at Music Television in the form of Channel V. I'm very, very proud to actually have been asked to do this because at Times Music, we've actually got more than 60% of our heads of department are women, and more than 35% of our total staff is women. And out of that, I think more or less about 20 to 20% are below the ages of 28 to 30. So I was pleasantly surprised and really honored to be here.
We actually asked you because you are a champion of women for the region. So welcome, Mandar. So let's just jump straight into it, right? So we really like to think ourselves as non-discriminatory when it comes to gender. But the truth is that there is a thing called gender bias. We want to focus on how gender bias manifests around the workplace and in your business and professional interactions in the industry. So it's basically a question of 2 parts, and you're free to answer them one after the other. So my first part is, have you witnessed or experienced gender bias professionally in the workplace? Whether it's with colleagues, female, male, doesn't matter. What form did it come in? A remark, some terminology, decisions made by leadership? What has been your professional and corporate engagement with discrimination and prejudice? And of course, how did you address it and how did you handle it? So I think we can go in the same order, maybe start with Vivian.
Okay.
Give us a view of what you've seen all these years and what you've done about it.
It's going back. So I think that the music industry has come a long way from when I started in the business. I think we have a lot longer way to go. And I think what's imperative is that we celebrate young women that are entering the workforce. I think my personal experiences as a young person in the industry, as an attorney, I was often the only woman in the room. I was often the only woman on the conference call, and I was young. And I never had an outward manifestation that I perceived from another individual that was gender biased towards me as a person. But the overarching, just general constructs of the music industry at that time lent itself to feeling that way, irrespective of whether it was direct to me, one person to another. And I probably spent the first 5 years of my career overcompensating for what I felt was my need to prove myself, to work harder than everybody else, to get to where I wanted to go with my career. I was probably overly aggressive as an attorney in many conversations. And when I developed more confidence in myself, and I was able to relinquish the notion that I had of being a woman in the music industry, I was able to temper my interactions in a way that were better for the growth of my career. They were better for my clients, were better for my daily sanity. It's very interesting. My father was born in 1923. The one person that I experienced gender bias with was my father. And my husband is a music attorney as well. And though I don't practice anymore, back in the day, we were both practicing. And we would go to spend time with my parents. And my father would look at my husband and say, "Peter, did you hear about all these new bands? Did you see?" And that was how I experienced it. So imagine growing up with that sort of notion of what men and women's role were in life. And my father was amazing. He was always incredibly proud of me, but he could never get over that immediate instinct to talk to the man in the room, irrespective of the fact that the woman in the room had the same profession. So I think that when I was able to remove myself from what were kind of deep-seated intuitions about interaction, I was able to really grow. And I think now when I look at my career, I look at my team is largely women because they were the best candidates for the job. I'm on 2 advisory boards. One at the USC Annenberg School of Communications has an initiative started by a woman named Dr. Stacy Smith called the Inclusion Initiative. I'm on her board, and it's a very robust research organization that focuses on women and underrepresented minorities in all facets of the entertainment business across film, TV, music, C-suites to who's standing behind the camera. And I'm on Alicia Keys' advisory board for She Is the Music, which is super focused on women songwriters because Dr. Smith did studies a couple of years ago now that indicated, well, there may be women on the charts, and that's not necessarily true of all genres of music.
Of course. Yeah.
That there may be women on the charts, but they're not writing the songs, and they're not getting the credits, and they're not getting writer share. So we have an initiative to increase the percentage of female writer credits in top songs. So I've really committed myself now to help women, younger women, grow within our industry. And I think it's about the access, it's about how you hire, it's about what you do to retain women, it's about what you do to train them. And sometimes it's just exposure to the medium because they think they can't get in. So.
I'm curious to know when your dad would speak to your husband and not to you, considering you guys were in the same job. I mean, obviously that must have felt not very cool because here's a dad who loves you and is proud of you. But I'm very keen to know that at that time, did you ever sort of stop him and say, "But hey, Dad, I'm here. I do the same thing"? Did you actually confront him, talk to him, sort of try to reason with him ever?
Sure. Not every time it happens, because eventually I just threw in the towel and said, he's in his late 80s. It's just the way he is. And maybe he's actually trying to connect with my husband. And so I gave him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt at times, but absolutely, I would absolutely confront him and say, hello, I'm here.
Okay, thanks. Priyanka?
I think everything that Vivian said, and maybe that's also because both of us, Vivian's also been an attorney in her past career life, so I completely resonate with everything that she said. That I think for the longest time, and I'll say this about me, right? I constantly kept saying that, and I still tend to believe it as much as possible, that every opportunity, every situation is gender neutral. At least that's something that I need to believe with as starting point. And it's something that I tell a lot of young women, that if you're going to go in with the mindset that, oh, there is a bias, that's chances are that you're going to try and see it even in instances where it's got nothing to do with bias. And it happens. It happens a lot of times where I'll have a lot of other women come and complain to me that, oh, it's just because of this. And you know, sometimes have to look at it objectively and say, no, darling, it's got nothing to do with that, right? There is also merit, there is also talent, and certain things are truly have got nothing to do with your gender. It just boils down to whether or not you are the right person for the job, whether or not you have the right set of value add, did you have a good point to argue. Having said that, I think as you know, my practice increases, as the time that I spend in business increases, as the power that you are able to exercise and the influence that you have increases, you do sense that there are certain instances, and of course not all of it is intentional, but yes, there are instances and bits and pieces of bias that you feel. And I can give countless examples, right from, you know, Vivian mentioning that sometimes it's inevitable that when you have a male and female lawyer, instinctively you turn to the man in the room, assuming that he's the person in conduct of the conversation. So from things like that to even things like, you know, if I have to appear in court before a judge, I will spend that extra amount of time trying to focus on how I look, maybe tone down the way I appear, be conscious about how I'm dressed, simply because I don't think too many men have to fuss about that, but I have to do that because I know that I don't want the attention to be focused on appearance, but I want it to be focused on what I have to say. And in an ideal world, you would like not to have to obsess about these smaller details, right? It does exist. I think while it exists, how much you enable it and how much you let it consume you is entirely in your hands. And I think which is why one of the things that helped me deal with it is to think in my head that we're all starting at a level playing field. I'm going to go in there and do my best, right? Irrespective of what the gender is. That's one. Coming to, I think, how we deal with it, at least in my setup, because I am a leader, I have my own practice, and it's not something that we've done consciously, but even today the male is to female ratio within my law firm is 9:1, where you have 9 female attorneys for every single male attorney. I'm often given a hard time by my senior partner saying, what the hell is going on here? Like, why do you only have women working for you? But, you know, it's not conscious. There's a fabulous bunch of women. Contrary to what people tend to think that, oh, all lawyers are aggressive and these are some, you know, bunch of alpha females. They're not actually. You know, each one has a different tact. You'll find someone who is, you know, mellow, but that's the way she can get the job done. You have someone who's, you know, more outspoken, more aggressive. So basically what I'm trying to say is all shades and varieties. But, you know, I believe in them. You empower them. And one of the other things that I have had to learn, I'm not a mother yet, but I do have a lot of young moms that have started working with me. I didn't have this situation in the beginning, but as the firm is growing, you bring in more and more resources. And it's something that I've realized that a lot of women, especially lawyers, tend to drop out of the workforce as soon as they're young mothers, right? So I think one of the things that I've also had to consciously learn as a boss is what can I do to make this environment conducive to her? You know, yes, you'll have a great partner, you may have a great set of in-laws, but ultimately, I think in a lot of instances, you are the primary caregiver as the mother. So I think for me, it's been a lot of conscious learning that what can I do differently to make sure that she doesn't feel that, oh, this is me being a mother is a baggage. And, you know, I don't want to be a burden on Priyanka. So I think that's something that we've been constantly trying to adapt, to learn, to try and put teams around it, to try and lend support. And it's a learning curve. You know, you face situations and you try and adapt. I think so long as there is an intent that, no, I want to make this work for another colleague, you'll keep working towards it.
Let me ask you something, Priyanka. You know, it's often, for more often than not, it's always we look towards the man. And this is please, Both Mandara and I, as you know, are champions for women, and publicly so. But it's exactly what you said about how you are conscious about dressing before going to court, and you have 9 women to 1 man. So while it always seems like the men are the one who are perpetuating bias, you're also doing stuff which is very bias worthy, whether or not the person in the front has any bias or not. What would happen if you dressed however you wanted and you just went and like became the lawyer that you were every day? Would you lose a case? Would you be underserved? Would the guy in the front say, "Oh my God, she's wearing bright red lipstick, but her argument is shit"? Would that happen in today's day and age?
Well, but there have been instances where senior lawyers have turned to a female attorney and said, I'd rather that you not wear heels in a courtroom. See, and you don't want to get pulled up by a senior and be told that, it doesn't look good that your hair is colored in a certain way, or that you're wearing bright red nail polish, or that you're wearing heels to court. Does it take away from what I do? No, it doesn't. But what happens is I spend that much time making sure that the other person is getting over my physical image, and then start focusing on the substance of what I have to say. So it's just easier for me to not go through that and get straight to the point.
Do you think there'll be a time in the near future where you wouldn't give a crap about that? Are you working, all of you? And I'm going to come to each of you.
I hope so.
I certainly hope that colored hair in a courtroom, maybe pushing it a little bit, but wearing heels, which is exactly what you do every day, or wearing lipstick or nail polishes, like me wearing a shiny suit. I don't care. I don't care who's in front of me. I don't care if the chairman of my company or a judge or whoever, right? I'm not going to change anything for anyone, and that is nothing to do with bias or gender neutrality, equality, nothing, right? But my point is, would there come a day in the next 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, certainly not the 100 that the global index is saying, where you just say, if your senior counsel says that, dude, I'd rather you not wear heels, when you come to court, maybe you can answer back and say that, sir, I'd rather you not be the senior attorney who's on the case with me. Would that day come soon, one day?
I think yes, and I don't know about others, but at least personally, the more you sort of travel in this journey, the more confidence you have in where you are, and the more valuable you start becoming to people. You're able to say that this is it, right? You're becoming a more unapologetic, more authentic version of yourself, and it's take it or leave it. Not in an arrogant way, but you're coming to me because of the quality of my advice, not because of the quality of the appearance.
Well said. Neeta?
Yeah, so, it's interesting. I'm going to just dovetail on that comment because well, first of all, I mean, both of you are spot on about what you have, said here. It is about confidence, but societal norms have happened through the decades, through the centuries, that there's been a lot of conditioning, a lot of gender bias that has sort of put women into a variety of schemes, we'll call it, that lower confidence or work towards lowering confidence. And so there is this sense that we have to pay attention to all these things, and we can't quite chill out on trying really hard because there is a lack of confidence. I mean, we see it in a ton of studies out there all over the world, globally, that women have a lower confidence level than men. As a gender, it is there. So that, gender bias is that interesting thing because it's unconscious, implicit bias. It comes in that form that is unconscious. And then there's conscious bias, which, it's much more sinister, much more evil in its spirit, that intent. But on the unconscious side, so many of us work, both men and women, on unconscious bias. It's what Priyanka was alluding to when she talked about the fact that we sort of see men in a certain way, and everyone does. And we tend to, there are plenty of studies that show that we tend to look at men as more leaders. We see an image of a man as it's a stereotype, and there's exceptions to the rules, but that we tend to hear a woman's voice very differently from how we hear a man's voice. And when you start to have that reinforced, it does break down confidence. I don't know if the older you get, the more chilled out or the more confident you get, because I think the more that years pass, the more you start to see, and as you have more wisdom, you start to see the amount of times you're broken down. It doesn't happen across the board, but I definitely see examples of it as I work with women all around the world, in France, in Australia, in the UK, in India, for sure. It's like I'm seeing that time and time again, and throughout the United States, that we are needing to have some serious training, some serious awareness raising about that unconscious implicit bias, to get us to raise it to our awareness level, to make sure that we start to see that to start to notice our own behavior, that it is sort of this decoding and this psychological process, in a sense, of having to all go through a bit of therapy, especially in the workplace, to start to hear women's voices in a different way, to allow for those voices to thunder through a boardroom or through a conference room as loudly as sometimes a man's voice does. I often do hate to separate the genders this way, but as I start to see the research and I start to really look at real life examples and work in this area that I have for over 20 years, I'm seeing that there is actually a reason that we need to attack gender bias, that it is definitely there. It's most predominant in the workplace, and that our participation in it it's very important for men and women both to participate in that plight to get over our gender bias. I find it in my actions every day, and at least I try to have some mindfulness around it so that I can catch myself and go, oh, please let me hear the voice of a woman as a leader, not just the man's.
True, well said. Hiba, you work for an Indian-owned American company based in New York with big operations here, run by three boys. You're in an incredible position, and you're a senior woman leader. Tell us about what you think about this. Yeah. Tell us about bias in your world.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm also very new to the music industry. Prior to this, I was in healthcare, so that was also something that I had to deal with as I navigated through this industry. But what I can say is that I'm incredibly proud and grateful to work for a company like JioSaavn. And yes, our leadership is predominantly male, but we're changing that. We are actively having those conversations about what we can do to, promote women based off of potential and merit, and, overcompensate for, the positions that we're hiring for, over-indexing on that. So for, going to interview candidates, like, let's make sure that the pool that we're interviewing from is predominantly female. So I think that definitely is something that, we as a company are committed to. When I brought this up to Rishi, our CEO, he was very, passionate about this, and he, spoke across the organization and how we can really have parity across the company. And that's something that, they've been supportive of. Any sort of initiative that we want to launch, if there's, our Women's Day event that is really important to us, or just inviting women from other organizations to speak to our company about, what we could be doing better. All of those things are supported. But, from a personal level, as an A&R, I think I do experience a lot of bias, just being a female. There really aren't that many female A&Rs. There aren't that many women who are running music labels. So I think even when artists approach me, they'll say, who do I send my demos to? Is it your boss, or do I send them to you? And I think the difference is, I'm empowered to make these decisions. I'm empowered to greenlight a song. I'm empowered to, reach out to an artist and say, hey, you should be a part of our roster. And, it was really, really interesting. Vivian, I was actually reading the Annenberg, I think it was the most recent report, but 21% of the artists across the board from, the Grammys were female, only 21%, 12% songwriters and 2% producers. So as an A&R, what can I do to, change, especially being a female A&R? I can, try to reach out to more female producers and songwriters and artists to make sure that at the executive level, I'm making that change. So it's reflecting what's happening outside, and it's changing what's happening, at the Grammys. That's been such a hot topic over the last couple of years. So I think the most important thing that we can do is just be transparent about it. Let's acknowledge that this is an issue, and what can we do to improve this going forward?
Agreed. Well said. Mandar, over to you, man. let me ask you a version of this question, right? And as
Okay.
two men who run organizations, who are probably the only two companies in the region who have 50% or above in leadership, right? I have 4 senior women and 4 senior men who are my leadership team, half and half.
Okay.
You have 60%. Apart from the two of us, there's literally nobody who's got that kind of stacked up female leadership. For my part, I belong to a company that's hardwired almost to believe in meritocracy to the point of where I don't even see the difference between women and men. To me, you're the person. Whatever you say is, if irrespective of your gender, I wouldn't care. So for people like you, and I'm asking you, this is like almost like an alter ego to myself. Do you think about this? Do you make it a mandate to say we must have more women, or is it just pure meritocracy and it's just the kind of organization that you've built? Because true culture is built in a balanced equation, right? There can't be too many men, too many women. I mean, I'm not sure that 9:1 lawyers is any better than 9 men to 1 either, right? So I'm saying if you had to sort of say both are, and I know why Priyanka is doing it and it's great, right? But if you had to just remove that lens for a minute and wear my eyes for a minute, like I genuinely don't see the difference. To me, you could be a boy, girl, man, I don't care. You're there for a specific job to deliver the goods. Whether you're a mother, whether you're whether you're 57, I honestly have no lens. So I'm just asking you, as the only other man in this panel, do you think about it? Does it come automatically? And are you truly the guy who actually understands and values meritocracy and practices it?
Okay, I think to answer your question, I don't think about it. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. Like I mentioned, my
Correct.
entire background is either starting companies or working with corporates who own turnaround companies. So when you come with that mindset, right, you kind of take a step back from the bias and you take a different view, and that view is of performance, right? That view is of output. So I don't think it's about a thought of saying that, am I hiring women? Am I hiring men? I think it's about, are you right for the job or you're not right for the job? That's about it, right? The second part of it is, are you empowered enough to do the job? But, that's kind of getting into management lingo. The third part, I think, is like what Priyanka mentioned, and I do agree that when you land up in certain situations, right, whether that's in front of a judge, and those are different because we live in a country like India that has got such a, kind of paternal sort of viewpoint, right, that we have a certain bias automatically, whether we want it or not. We have a certain outlook automatically, whether we want it or not. We have a certain thought process, whether we want it or not. I do believe there is few of us at leadership level today who don't see that color, but certainly, yes, a certain sense of bias kind of exists. And I think what it is that it's upon us to be able to make sure that meritocracy over trumps everything else, because the more importance you give to something, the bigger the problem begins. So you change that playground. You change that playground into training, you change that playground into empowerment, and you change that playground into a meritocracy, right? So then it's not a question of, am I hiring more women? Am I hiring more men? Are we looking at a bias here? No. The second thing I believe that we do, and I personally believe in it, I'm not really a crusader of any sort or neither an activist of any sort, but I do believe that any sort of bias needs to fundamentally have a zero tolerance policy with proof. Right. And I think that really forms the cornerstone of organizations, that if you have a non-colored sort of outlook towards performance, right, and you have a zero tolerance policy towards any kind of bias, I think you'll have a fair organization that has the kind of leadership we do, or the kind of gender mixes that come in.
I agree. So there are two kinds of people, right, Mandar? The guys who really look out for it and watch it and then perpetuate like a really fair balance. And there is, from what I hear, you sound a little like me, where I would say stuff out of turn to a woman because in my head she's not a woman. If you've done something well, I'll say whoa, and if you've done something terrible, I'm like, what the hell, right?
Yeah.
Are you in that way guilty of bias? Would you ever say something do you perpetuate it yourself? Do you think about it when you're talking to people, to your senior leaders or to your junior leaders?
I think the answer should be they should be answering all of this and not me. But having said that,
No, that's why I'm specifically asking you.
I mean, I think it kind of comes on your own style of management. That if you're if you're a sort of go-getter and you want the rest of your team to be a go-getter, you push people equally, right? You push whether it's male, female, it doesn't matter. It's not colored. But I've sort of, personally speaking, started to be a little more conscious about how and where I speak in that sense, and I think that's sheerly out of sensitivity, not out of bias, right? And I think
Correct.
that's
well said.
More sensitivity.
Well said. Okay, we're I think 35 minutes in, which is incredible because we have so much to say and so much to discuss. But I'm gonna jump to company culture, right? I do believe that at the heart of everything, it's the culture of the company, and every company has a different culture. To Hiba's point about JioSaavn's culture and Vivian of Google and YouTube they've got books and manuals and Bibles and culture. I mean, so do I. As Universal Music, these are things we take extremely seriously. And in India, if you look at and you really are honest with the companies that are in and around you, culture only comes from the top. The CEO, very often in India, which is an founder owner from a family that's been in 6 generations of men or 3 generations of men, he's the guy. It's never a she. He's the guy who sets the tone of the company. He's the guy who says, this is what my company is all about. Even the younger generations, who've gone abroad and, probably, have a very different sort of outlook than what their parents did. But in today's day and age, company culture, I think will for the future, be able to not have this 100-year gap for gender parity, but, bring it down substantially. So I want each of you individually to tell me about your company cultures, what you're allowed to say, and what you would do to radically change it. Because I really do believe the time has come where we can't wait for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years for these things to change gently. Somebody is going to have to rip the Band-Aid off and saying, this is enough, this is never going to happen again. This is my company culture, this is my code book, this is not cool anymore. And I think if enough of us, including the men, do that, I think we will be in a far, far, far better place in terms of parity. So I just want to, one by one, Vivian, Priyanka, Nita, Hiba, Mandar, tell me about your company culture and what you would radically and rapidly change in the next quarters, years, whatever.
Okay, so I think you absolutely got it right about the manuals and the handbooks and the trainings and the workshops, and there's a massive focus within Google and YouTube on Nita was mentioning unconscious bias. There are a plethora of trainings on unconscious bias, right? So it goes deep. We have employee resource groups that are women at Google, women at YouTube. We have Black and Brown ERG groups, LGBTQ+. So diversity and inclusion within the organization is of paramount importance and a top priority. As you know, and everyone is keenly aware of what's been happening, which started in the United States around racial justice in the last few months. The emphasis around inclusion has heightened even more so than it was already, and it was already a very big part of our culture on a regular basis. Insofar as gender specifically is concerned, the at YouTube and my immediate world is in the YouTube product area of Google, right? However, there are a lot of female leaders within Google as well. Our CFO is a woman. Our CMO at Google is a woman. Our CMO at YouTube is a woman. Our CEO at YouTube is a woman. And so when you referenced the culture of an organization being top-down driven, that is how it has largely worked at Google. And kudos to Larry and Sergey and Sundar, who are the ones that lead that culture and have led that culture in the past. I think that for I think there's room for growth, nevertheless, right? Because I think where you see the biggest gaps across the music industry and at all companies, whether it's a label, whether it's YouTube, whether it's other streaming services, agencies, you see a senior level gap where you have less women. And that, I think, is where we all need to strive to make things better and to grow those placements. And I think the way you do that is through making commitments. Commitments to changes to your policies and commitments to how you hire. I can speak in the US, there are 75,000 employees of Google, right? It's massive. But there are certain parts of the workforce where, whether it's for demographic reasons, there are geographies where you can increase levels of underrepresented groups within senior levels if you invest more in those geographies. So there's a plethora of ways that you can focus as a big organization or small organization on
yes.
increasing underrepresented groups, including women, in your ranks. And I think some of those commitments, you may have seen that Google has made a commitment to increase by 30% the number of Black plus and underrepresented groups at senior levels within the organization by 2025. It's that kind of, we're going to set a goal and we're going to work to achieve that goal, and we're going to create the roadmap and the plans that we need to take, where we're going to invest to get there.
Exactly on that, I just want to ask one thing to both Vivian and Nita. Nita, you go first. For the first time in history, we are hearing these new terms, these new CXO terms called Chief Diversity Officer, Chief Inclusion Officer. It's incredible. We've never heard of. I mean, CXOs were always CEOs, CFOs, CMOs, and MDs. We never heard of these before, and suddenly now they're not only very senior jobs, they're accountable. It's their mandate. That's what they have to do. And obviously, these are across companies with hundreds and thousands of people. So I just want from a US perspective, Nita, and also from a global women in music perspective, tell me how important you think these two roles are, and you think this is what the future is going to be.
Right. No, it's very important. It's been a long time coming. I wish it had been there when I was, in my younger years at the companies that I worked at. It's so crucial to getting that change, right, that we need to see. It's so important for someone to focus on it. It's a job. It's an important job. It is not some soft subject, which is what I think so many companies who still have not gone towards that change need to understand. We talk about company culture, and I'm so incredibly thrilled to see that it's happening at such amazing companies such as yours out there, and it's amazing. It's fabulous. And I look at Google, for example, and they've had folks like Una King, who were she was just an amazing force in helping to push that discussion very early on in diversity and inclusion. And that's an amazing thing, that companies like that are being progressive minded. And I think as I counsel and consult with so many more of the smaller and medium-sized companies who are just starting to look at human resources issues and saying, wait, should I get a people officer? What's the difference between human resources and people officer? And then they say, should we talk about diversity and inclusion? I'm constantly reminding them that they should, and that they need to put that in there as a role in their budget and their operational costs, just like any other. I mean, and there's the why of it, right? All the studies around the world have shown greater gender equality experience gives you faster economic growth. Why do this? Because you're going to actually do better as a company. So it is an important department to invest in. It's an important employee to have, and to have that decoding, reconditioning by changing it within your people, within your human resources, and giving your company a chance to get to that fast growth is pretty important.
Thanks. Vivian, very quickly, just a quick half a minute. Tell us what you think about this whole new world of, Chief Inclusion Officers and Chief Diversity Officers. And I know you guys already have some of these, so.
Yeah, we have them at at the product area level, and then obviously across Google. And I think it's critical because it's hard work. It's vital work, and it's really hard, and it takes an enormous amount of effort and focus. And if you don't have the people dedicated to it, and it's just someone else's 20% or 10%, you're not going to be able to achieve what you need to actually create.
I agree. I think, for me and Mandar and boys in the game, I think all of us need to be our own chief diversity officers. I mean, your role as CEO, I would really like and it doesn't matter. You don't have to be a woman or a man. I would like my official designation to read Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer, and Chief Diversity/Inclusion Officer. If all of us did that, imagine the world we'd be in, because by executive mandate, that's what you need to change. And hence, the bias or the lack of thereof will automatically sort of, come up, and we'll be able to sort it out. I think we have 5 minutes left. So very quickly to Priyanka, Heba, and Mandar, let's talk about accountability. Now you have in the very big companies, so India is still far away from having its own CDO and CIO. We will certainly start the trend, but it's a while away, especially in these, third generation big companies that have been run and family owned, and they're rather large. Let's talk about accountability. What will happen in the next few years if parity is not obtained, or the road to parity is not clarified, or the culture that's being written does not have gender parity or equality hardwired into their culture book, whether it's a book, it's a thought, whatever it is? How should we hold companies accountable? How would you like to see your own companies and your own firms being held accountable, and what should we do? Priyanka.
Okay. I think it's interesting that you bring this up, Devraj, because one thing that I feel very strongly about is it's all very well that we have all these conversations about inclusion, diversity, what to do, what not to do. But like I mentioned earlier when we were chatting, is that we don't have any consequences. There's no deterrent, right? So again, going back to what law teaches me is that you have a rule, and then you comply with it, because if you don't, there are deterrents. Either there's a penalty or there are some consequences. Unfortunately, with this entire conversation about inclusion and about doing the right thing and about making sure that we set the right culture, what if we don't? There are zero consequences today. Yes, there are hard-hitting consequences that I don't think people think about, but I think it doesn't today. Let's say, for example, if your chief diversity officer, inclusion officer, managing director, 5 years from now fail to achieve a better gender ratio, I'm not even saying 50-50, what's going to happen? What is the consequence? Sure, we may think that, this company is still sort of not as progressive as it should be. But in real terms, what is the consequence? Very, very little. And I think that's something that we need to all take a moment, reflect, and think that what are the deterrents that I can build that compels people to comply. Again, maybe it's an extreme sort of ideology to adapt, but I'm also saying this because we're all in a place like India that, whether we like to accept it or not, is still far, far behind, right? You read out the stats at the beginning of this conversation. So I think we definitely need that sort of stick in hand approach to make sure that there is better enforcement. Small examples, you have all these posh committees or internal complaint committees that we have now at workplaces where women can go and complain if they have an instance of harassment, right? But practically speaking, we don't even think about, okay, if she needs to engage external counsel to get legal help, if she needs to go get therapy because of something that she's going through, are we as an organization willing to support that? Are we going to provide separate aid for it? No one thinks of all of these practical challenges, right? So I think we need to have a more practical, holistic approach to this, need to build in those consequences, even when it is at the highest management level, saying, if this is not done, X, Y, Z are going to be consequences, not just some fanciful that, we're going to get like a poor rating or poor review, or we're not going to be a cool workplace, but true accountability needs to be thought about and needs to be actually put in place.
If I may, I wanted to jump in more for a second. It's just that absolutely, I completely agree. And I was mentioning to you guys before that in the environmental movement, when they were trying to get accountability put in there, one of the things they did is they started outing companies that had bad environmental practices. And it was about using PR and marketing from the movements, right? From So, from the environmental organizations, but also other companies that were socially responsible and responsible for climate change, they started going on a massive campaign, both against companies and politicians. So there was something that the League of Conservation Voters would do every year, every election year, called the Environmental Scorecard. And it would get out to 80 news stations saying, this is how your congressmen and senators voted on issues concerning the environment. I mean, I think there needs to be a similar movement that happens with having equal opportunities, both on sexism, racism, ageism, right? To be able to actually have a scorecard that's put out and to out companies that are not doing it. So,
if you're in India, classism as well.
And classism, of course, absolutely. So, these are definitely areas that we can start to push out that kind of PR campaign around accountability.
Hiba, very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as a company, your culture it's what you do. It's not what you say. So at JioSaavn, I think especially, we never want to be fashionable. We want to be fundamental. And I think especially in this post-Me Too era, we've definitely noticed that there is this sensitivity, and Mandar, you were talking about this before, around interacting with women. But I think women aren't actually asking for sensitivity training or for men to walk on eggshells around them. What we are asking for, what we need from men, is allyship and actionable changes across, organizations. So this means, taking a good look at ourselves and asking whether we've taken the steps to promote women, and recruit female leaders and instill a strong culture of equality. And I think you can hire the chief inclusion officers and the chief diversity officers, and it can, be in press the next day, XYZ company hires so-and-so to hold this position, but what does that really mean? Are those people decision makers? Are those people able to, really influence change at the company? So I think that's something that is important to focus on. And I think, it's not about sensitivity. It is actually about recognizing that, if there is a female in the room, does she feel supported? And what can you do? How can you go out of your way to make sure that they actually, although they're at the table, do they have a voice? And how can you help them? How can you pass the baton to them, if they feel uncomfortable? I think you do have to recognize those things. And that's something that, I've noticed, especially at our company, is that, everyone is being more aware of, the environment that we're in, and just how can we be more supportive. We're calling out the microaggressions and the unconscious bias. And, we do have a diversity and inclusion committee, but, it's what are the actions that we're taking as a company that are really driving those changes, So, yeah.
Okay, we're going to have to end, and I really want to do not the obvious. I would like the man in the panel to have the final word. Mandar, as someone who Mandar loves being put in the spot. Consequences, and I'll also tell you. I mean, let's be honest. We have an industry body called IMI, and we have several societies. And Mandar and I are senior leaders, and we're innovative. We've never ever seen a woman in any of these. It's basically a very large boys' club. And I'm dying for the time when we have women in there. And it's not going to happen unless and until we consciously go after our number 2s and number 3s and promote them quickly, because we can, and because they're worth it, and because they'll probably be as good as us, if not better, right? So I want you to tell me, and the panel, and everyone at All About Music who's listening, the final word on what you think real consequences should be, what you would do about it, and on behalf of our Indian music industry, as somebody who's currently chairman of PPL and so on and so forth, from a position of power, what would you do in terms of actionable consequence, not just for your company, but for across the board?
I think, given the kind of country we live in, it's I'd like to take one step behind more than forward, and first understand that it's really not only about consequences. It's not about forcing people to do things, because that kind of creates what is our culture. It's the reservation system, right? So we have to be cognizant of that we're not creating a parallel reservation system, right? Because firstly, we're not one simple culture. We are a bunch of different countries clobbered into India. So there are those kind of sensitivities and diversities to consider. The second part of it is the ability for us as a leadership level. Honestly, I would really be very, very happy to see a female CEO as the head of one of the music companies, and that hasn't happened for God knows how long. Now, whose fault is that, right? And we can sit here and kind of go all around the place, or we can take no, absolutely, or the people before us. But my point is, we can either sit here and we can either say, okay, I'm going to put a consequence, I'm going to do that, or we can say, look, I'm going to create a platform, I'm going to create a lot of training, but more importantly, it's psychological training that you don't need to feel biased. Because without that psychological makeup change, no one's going to move forward. You can do whatever you want. And I think that culture, that education begins at the grassroots level. That you have to be able to, I wouldn't say empower is the word, but to be able to put women at a pedestal where they have the knowledge, they have the ability, and they have the confidence to take on a room full of people. And that, I believe, is far more important than having different kinds of structures. And certainly, Priyanka, I'm not disagreeing on the consequential part, but without the foundations, the consequences remain only action, only something that comes in. So that's really what I think, and and that's really a personal thought. But with that, I'm with you, Devraj. I think across the industry, we have a lot of women in the record label, and we certainly have a lot of women lawyers, not only on this panel, but I think across all our companies. And I think that translates across the industry as well.
I think, we have to end now because we're severely out of time and we have so much to talk about. I mean, this could be a full day panel and we could go on. But I want to say thank you to each one of you. You're in different geographies, different parts of the world coming together to really discuss something that's important. And I hope we started a real conversation and not, this usual habit we have of just saying, oh, women's the others. I think the time is gone. I would love to be part of a movement with Mandar and my other fellow boys to say that if Google has 2025 ambitions and Universal does and everyone else does, maybe IMI can have a 2025 goal of having one of us responsible for putting the first woman CEO as one of our labels or our publishing companies or whatever have you. I think we need to have very tangible goals that we have to enforce, and not maybe enforce, but coax into happening, which has everything that all of you wonderful people have said. So I thank you very much for joining me on behalf of All About Music and our curator committee. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
I'll see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Devraj.
For having us. It's really a pleasure to be here and do
Thank
this
you,
with you all
Viva,
today.
Priyanka, Deepa, Vivian.
Okay, silent
Thank you.
pause. Chandni, we're done. Do you want to?
Someone's disappeared. Priyanka, that was a really